Imagine a man standing alone on a mountain, facing kings, false prophets, and an entire nation that had forgotten the living God. His name was Elijah, the prophet of Israel, and his story is not just history, it's a mirror of the battles we face today between truth and lies, light and darkness. Welcome to Divine War Stories, a channel where the ancient battles of faith come alive to teach us how to walk with Christ in our modern struggles. Here, we don't just tell stories, we uncover the eternal lessons hidden in them so you can grow closer to the one who called you to live set apart. Elijah's life begins in a moment of crisis, when Israel was turning away from the true God and following idols, forgetting the covenant that once defined them as his chosen people. This moment is not too far from our reality today, where distractions, false gods of materialism, and the worship of self dominate the culture. Just as Elijah stood as a voice crying out against compromise, we too are called to rise in the midst of spiritual confusion. But how? Through a life that reflects God's purity, not perfection because we know perfection is beyond our reach, but a posture of heart that desires to honor Christ. That is where the essence of walking in God's way truly begins. When we talk about being set apart for God, we often imagine something heavy, impossible to carry, like a burden too great to bear. But the truth is, Christ never asked us to achieve flawless living by our own strength. Instead, he calls us to lean on him, to surrender, and to trust that his Spirit within us shapes us day by day. Think about how Elijah prayed earnestly and the heavens obeyed. He wasn't powerful because of himself, but because he trusted the power of the Almighty. In the same way, being set apart is not about trying harder, it's about relying deeper on Christ, who transforms us from the inside out. Elijah's courage at Mount Carmel was not born out of self-confidence. It came from knowing who his God was. Surrounded by hundreds of prophets of Baal, Elijah didn't compromise, didn't hide, and didn't blend in. He stood firm. And this is the reflection for us today. When the world pressures us to normalize sin, to call darkness light, and to walk away from the truth, the Spirit of Christ equips us to stand differently. Living this way is not arrogance, it is faithfulness. It is showing, through our choices, that God's presence is worth more than any temporary pleasure or approval the world offers. But here's the challenge. None of us can claim to live completely separated from sin. We stumble, we fall, and sometimes we even run in the opposite direction, just like Elijah himself once did when fear gripped him after Jezebel's threat. This shows us that being set apart does not mean never failing, it means returning every time we fall. Christ is not demanding the impossible from us. He is inviting us to walk with him, to let him lift us back up, and to remember that our soul is the most valuable treasure we have. That's why he came, to redeem what we could never fix on our own. Let's make this clear. Sin always promises freedom but delivers chains. Elijah confronted a nation trapped in false worship because they believed idols would give them rain, harvest, and joy. But in reality they were left empty. Isn't that the same today? People believe money, status, or indulgence will satisfy their souls, yet they end up more broken than before. Christ warns us against sin not because he wants to limit us, but because he loves us. He knows that sin destroys while he came to give us life, abundant, eternal, and overflowing. Think of the widow at Zarephath, the woman Elijah stayed with during famine. She had nothing left but a handful of flour and oil, yet when she obeyed God's word through Elijah, her jar never ran dry. That is the picture of living surrendered, not perfect but faithful. And when we walk in that kind of faith, God provides, sustains, and carries us even in the hardest seasons. The same Christ who multiplied bread for thousands is the one who multiplies grace in our lives today. He calls us to live distinct from the world because he knows the blessings that come from trusting him are far greater than anything the world could offer. Elijah's story also reminds us of prayer's power. He prayed and the heavens closed. He prayed again and the rain returned. This teaches us that being set apart is also about living connected to God in constant relationship. Prayer is not a ritual, it's alignment with the heart of Christ. And when we live in that connection, sin loses its grip, temptation loses its power, and our hearts are strengthened to endure. If Elijah, a man like us, could move heaven through prayer, imagine what Christ can do through us when we live surrendered to him. But maybe you wonder, why would Christ call us to a standard we can never fully reach? The answer is simple, because he wants our hearts, not our performance. Elijah was bold, yet he also had moments of weakness, running into the wilderness and asking God to take his life. And in that low moment, God didn't reject him. Instead, he gave him rest, bread, and strength for the journey. That is the heart of Christ toward us. He knows we cannot be flawless, but he longs for us to walk close to him, allowing his love to restore us when we are broken. Living distinct from the world is not about appearing religious, it's about living in love. Remember what Christ said, "The greatest command is to love God and to love our neighbor." That's why he warns us about sin, not to crush us but to set us free to love fully without chains. When Elijah called Israel back to God, fire came down from heaven, and the people remembered who the true Lord was. That fire is symbolic of the Spirit who burns away compromise in us today, leaving a life that reflects his light. And that light is what the world desperately needs to see through us. So, as we reflect on Elijah's life, we see that being set apart for God is not an impossible burden but an invitation to intimacy with Christ. It is learning to stand firm like Elijah did on Mount Carmel, yet also learning to rest when we are weary as Elijah did under the broom tree. It is a balance of courage and dependence, boldness and humility. And above all, it is remembering that Christ does not measure our worth by our failures, but by his sacrifice on the cross. He calls us not to chase perfection but to walk daily in his grace. When Elijah stood on Mount Horeb, expecting God in the earthquake, the fire, or the storm, he instead discovered him in a gentle whisper. That scene reminds us that walking with Christ is not about chasing dramatic displays of power but about recognizing his voice in the stillness of our hearts. Being set apart means learning to listen, to silence the noise of the world, and to hear his gentle call guiding us in love. Too often we expect God to appear in ways that impress others, but he is far more interested in transforming us quietly, reshaping our character until his image shines through us. Elijah's journey shows us the contrast between human weakness and divine strength. Even after great victories he wrestled with fear and loneliness. Doesn't that sound like us? Moments where we feel close to God, yet soon after we feel overwhelmed by life's battles. But Christ is faithful even in those seasons. He doesn't expect us to have it all together. He expects us to surrender. And when we do, his grace meets us in our valleys. Being set apart means learning to depend not on how strong we feel but on how strong he is. Think of the fiery chariot that took Elijah up into heaven. It was a reminder that his life was never ordinary because he walked with God. The same truth applies to us. When we live distinct from the world, even the way we leave this earth will testify of Christ's presence in us. Paul echoes this when he writes that our citizenship is in heaven. Our lives here are temporary, but the soul Christ redeemed is eternal. That's why he cares so deeply about how we walk now. It's training us for eternity, shaping us to reflect his kingdom while still on earth. We often think of being set apart as avoiding bad things, but it's more than that. It's also about pursuing the good. Elijah not only opposed Baal, he also restored the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. That is our call too, not just to say no to sin, but to rebuild what has been broken, to live in ways that bring healing, restoration, and light. Christ himself modeled this when he healed the sick, lifted the poor, and embraced the rejected. He is calling us not only away from sin, but into love, mercy, and service. This leads us to something essential. Being set apart is never meant to be lived in isolation. Elijah once felt like he was the only one left serving God, but God reminded him there were still 7,000 in Israel who had not bowed to Baal. In the same way, Christ places us in his body, the church, because we are stronger together. That's why he calls us not only to follow him individually but also to gather with believers who truly preach Christ, live the gospel and serve the needy, the widows, the orphans, and the forgotten. We can't ignore that the world constantly pulls us to blend in, to soften our faith, to make compromises that silence the truth of Christ. Elijah faced the same pull when Israel followed the crowd. But he chose the narrow path, and Christ calls us to do the same. Not because he delights in making life harder, but because the narrow path leads to life. Sin may look easy now, but it always leads to emptiness. Christ offers a harder road, but one filled with peace, joy, and eternal hope. That is the difference Elijah's life still shouts across the centuries. Every time we resist sin, every time we choose prayer over distraction, love over bitterness, truth over comfort, we are reflecting Christ to the world. And the truth is, people are watching. Just as Israel watched Elijah on Mount Carmel, your family, friends, and community are watching your life. They may not read the Bible yet, but they are reading your example. Being set apart is not just for your sake. It is so that others might see Christ through you, and be drawn to the light that burns within your soul. So what does this mean for you right now? It means Christ is not asking for your perfection. He is asking for your surrender. He is not measuring you by your failures. He is covering you with his grace. And he is calling you to walk as a light in a dark world, even if you feel weak. Because the truth is, Elijah was human just like you. And if God could use him to confront kings, stop the rain, and call down fire, Imagine what Christ can do through you when you choose to walk with him daily. The call of Elijah's life is not just about courage, it is about alignment. Aligning your heart with Christ, aligning your actions with his word, aligning your love with his compassion. And this is where we find freedom. Because sin is slavery but Christ is liberation. Elijah's voice echoes today, choose this day whom you will serve. And as you choose Christ, you discover that being set apart is not a heavy burden, but the pathway to true life. It is where your soul, the most valuable treasure you possess, finds rest and eternal security. So let Elijah's story inspire you, not to chase perfection, but to walk daily with Christ. Read the scriptures because that is where his voice speaks clearest. Find a church that truly preaches Christ, that not only teaches the gospel but also lives it through works of love, serving the poor, caring for the orphans and widows as he commanded. And remember this, you are not alone in this journey. Christ has called you, he walks with you, and he will finish the work he started in you. Stay faithful, stay close, and let your life be the altar where his fire shines bright.